This is Kat Klingensmith with Retro Crime. For my last Christmas episode, the perpetrator was Louise, a bored, young, wealthy, and, unfortunately, inbred heiress in Ohio who used her gun to shoot out the candles on the Christmas tree. Her mother tried to wrestle the gun from her and got shot in the process. This year, our Christmas episode is about pretty much her exact opposite. The victim's name was Goldie Adams, and she was 48 years old and lived in a shanty at the garbage dump in East Liverpool, Ohio. And she lived with her common-law husband, John Adams. However, they were not related. Goldie Adams was originally Goldie Mercer, and she was born in 1900 and grew up in Congo, West Virginia, across the river from Ohio. Her father worked for the railroad, and her brothers and later her sons worked for the nearby pottery factory. And the pottery factory, Homer Laughlin, it used to be, that is indeed haunted. We've been there. Her family was as working class as one can get, and Goldie left school after the 5th grade. At 20, she married Roscoe Adams, better known as Ross, and within a year, she moved back in with her parents. Ross was unhinged and couldn't support his alcoholism and his family. Their marriage, however, still lasted for 28 years, although it was on and off. They had 2 children together, and the kids were raised primarily in a beat-up houseboat. Goldie was their primary caregiver, as Ross was on and off with his drinking binges. When their boat sank, they moved in with their neighbor, John Adams, in his houseboat. John was a lonely widower whose wife Blanche died in 1930 after being sick for a couple of weeks. Goldie and Ross reconciled and moved to a small city called Jethro, and John moved to the dump to oversee it. As usual, Goldie had enough of Ross's drunken abuse and returned to John, who hired her to be his live-in housekeeper. Despite their 12-year age difference, a relationship developed. They lived together as a married couple for 6 years until she died. On Christmas of 1948, Ross came over to celebrate with them. They all drank too much, and Goldie went to bed. Ross slept on the couch, and John remembers getting into bed with Goldie and noticing that she was dead. He woke Ross up in a panic. Then he went to a neighbor's and said something has happened to Goldie, and he needed to use their phone. The police came and brought John in for questioning. John asked if he did it. They didn't know. He said that if he did it, he's very sorry. They took that as a confession. They did a paraffin test, which was positive. Paraffin tests are becoming less common as technology improves. Pretty much, the hands are coated in a paraffin wax. It solidifies, and then it's peeled off. Dark blue spots indicate nitrates, like the ones used in gunpowder. They also tested Ross, and his test was negative. The police looked in the river for the gun, but it was unnecessary, because when asked, John simply told them that he had a gun hidden in his kitchen under a pan. He also said that only he and Goldie knew where the gun was. It was the exact same gun used to kill Goldie. John was charged with murder, and at his court case, the press was surprised by how pathetic this cold-blooded killer was. He was a quiet, feeble old man and polite. The prosecution used his alleged confession against him and the results of his paraffin test. Fortunately for him, the defense attorney knew his science. He explained that nitrates found in the paraffin test don't just exist in gunpowder. They exist in a vast variety of things, like fertilizer and tobacco. Think of that if you smoke. While John was working at the dump, it's not unreasonable to think that it was something else he touched. And the reason why paraffin tests are rarely used now is because they create false positives and don't pick up things that have been washed off or rubbed off. John's lawyer brought in old neighbors as character witnesses, and they all vouched for John. They said he was a good man and the only friend Goldie ever had. Ross, however, he was a brute. They knew him to be an abusive drunkard who once said in front of everyone that he would kill Goldie. John's testimony, he said that his last memory of the night was going to the stove, but he doesn't remember anything after that. Despite hearing that, the jury couldn't find John guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. After the trial, John moved in with his brother-in-law, even though his wife Blanche had died in the 1930s. John probably was a pretty good guy if he was still close to his deceased wife's family. Ross died a few years later from high blood pressure. I think John died in California. I'm not sure how he got there, but, good for him to go on with his life. So who killed Goldie? No one was ever convicted. Let's see. Her husband was abusive and had already threatened to kill her. If he had lived with John in the past, he may have known where in the kitchen John kept his gun. He could have washed his hands after shooting the gun. He was already in the kitchen. It would be strange that he could sleep through a gunshot in a small shack, right? Well, I can counter all of this with perhaps they got the gun after Goldie moved in to protect them from Ross. So Ross wouldn't know where it was. Ross didn't seem like the type who washed his hands in general. And if he was blackout drunk and passed out, he may have been able to sleep through everything. So the answer to who did it, I think it can be found in the answer to this question. Why was Goldie's abusive ex-husband celebrating Christmas Eve with her and the man she left him for? Ross's Christmas Eve was spent in a bar, then he bought a bottle of liquor and brought it over to John's. What kind of weak man would allow Ross not only into his home, but allow him to sleep on his couch that night? Merry Christmas. Women who are murdered are almost always the victims of an intimate partner or ex-partner. That criterion fits both men. Usually the partner has a history of violence. That fits Ross. The reason why they kill is usually jealousy. That would be John. Jealousy is more of an acute reaction, not one that spikes after 6 years. Ross doesn't seem the type who serves revenge cold. Let's put ourselves in John's shoes. He's a lonely widower and a good guy. He takes in his neighbors in their time of need. Despite being older and working as a laborer in a pottery shop, he paid Goldie to be his housekeeper. They developed a friendship, and she left him for her husband. Then she left her husband for him. Except Ross never quite left. He kept reappearing. John wasn't one for confrontation, even though it must have been difficult. His girlfriend wouldn't tell her estranged husband to leave them alone. And why hadn't she at least tried to divorce him in the 6 years she had been living with him? Maybe because it was West Virginia and it was too hard to get a divorce, but this is in the late 1940s. It was becoming maybe not more respectable, but at least more common. So here we are at Christmas time, and Goldie, she didn't put her foot down when her ex came over and passed out on the couch. If I were John, I might feel like she's choosing this scumbag over me. Not to mention, Goldie didn't have any friends, so she brought all of her Ross drama to John. No one wants to hear their partner cry over their ex. John may have felt like the biggest cuckold in the world, and he's too mild-mannered to do anything about it. Then one day, it was too much. She let Ross ruin their holiday, and he had enough liquid courage in him to finally do something about it. He shot her and passed out. When he woke up a few hours later, he realized what he had done. That probably was gunpowder on his hands, since it was a holiday, so he wasn't outside working. Alcohol and firearms are a terrible combination, especially when jealousy is added in. John probably should have been convicted. However, he wasn't a menace to society and didn't hurt anyone after that. The primary lesson we learned in Season 3 is no good comes from staying in abusive relationships. There's help. Go to Al-Anon meetings. For people addicted to their relationships and can't understand why they can't leave, there's Codependents Anonymous or Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous. For people who are addicted to love, to relationships, you'll finally feel understood. Partnerships are meant to help us thrive, and for some reason, too many people would rather wind up dead than risk being single. If we live long enough, we end up single anyway, right? At one point, Goldie had friends. She had family to turn to. Over time, she threw all of them away for a relationship that ended up not being worth it. The next time she made a friend, that turned into a relationship too, and look how that turned out. An unfortunately unhealthy pattern in our society is throwing everyone away once a relationship comes along. Everyone feels like they want to be around the person they're attracted to more than anyone else in the world. The butterflies, the obsession, and healthy people recognize that feeling for what it is and continue to maintain their loyal relationships. If they don't, they become entirely dependent on someone to meet their social and emotional needs. One person can't do that. That's codependency. That is entirely too much pressure to be someone's therapist, especially when most people don't have a degree in social work or counseling. Then, when that relationship ends, they find themselves alone because all the people they were friends with, all their family, they didn't like being thrown away. We all know someone who stopped responding to texts once their love interest texted them. Or we know someone whose girlfriends thought that she was desperate and pathetic because she ditched them all for a guy. Or we have a friend who he got married and then he disappeared. Eventually, they turn into Goldie. Miserable holidays, miserable relationships, and resented by family and friends whose loyalty wasn't reciprocated. Another lesson from this season is to be wary of people who shower you with too much adoration too soon. Real love is trust, and trust takes time to develop. They love who they want you to be, not who you are. Also, there are people out there who are so greedy that your life means nothing to them. It's not personal. It has nothing to do with your worth. They don't bother knowing who you are personally or what your worth is. So how can it be? So this is the end of season 3. We'll be back with season 4 at some point. I've got to take care of the kids I'm homeschooling, get their social needs met, go travel some more. Thank you for listening. Merry Christmas to you, and may this holiday season bring you everything you need.